Hey friends, it's Paul Ward here and welcome to On the Road. Have you ever attended a symphony or concert event and appreciated it, but you didn't fully understand it? Maybe you would have enjoyed it more if you had some context of what you were experiencing. Well, our next guest is definitely updating the symphony experience, making it more enjoyable for guests of all ages. Michael Christie, music director and conductor of the new West Symphony, welcome to On the Road.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And we want to thank our sponsor, Opus Escrow. So I had the pleasure of attending a recent symphony concert that you conducted in Thousand Oaks, California. And I have to say, it was incredible. It was so different than what I was expecting. I mean, I was expecting to appreciate it, but not fully understand it. And after attending that event, I fully not only appreciated it, but I understood it and then enjoyed it even more.
I'm so happy to hear that.
And you were explaining throughout the whole concert what was happening before each series of events. What made you think of that?
Well, it's not unusual for conductors to help the audiences through concerts, but our concerts are quite different because I take a Spotify playlist mentality when it comes to thinking about the audience experience, because we all listen to such an array of music now. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you don't allow that variety to reflect itself in the concert hall, you really miss an opportunity to connect with people in lots of different ways. When you have an audience of 1,500 people, plus or minus, that means you have 1,500 different expectations about how that event or performance should go. And I always found that a bit daunting. Mm-hmm. But then I decided, if I just have some umbrella topics or themes, then it really gives me an opportunity to weave in lots of different music. And I was really curious how the veteran orchestra goer would feel mm-hmm. if we almost did a bit of a whiplash of music where we kind of went this era and then back to that genre, and then we had a little bit of audience interplay. And of course, change is always a tricky thing.
Right.
So some of our folks would say, I don't want to do that little sing-along at the end, and they would leave. But we have so few people leaving now,
right,
because as many of our founding audience members would say to me, I didn't think I would like it, but when you ask the audience how many are there for the first time, and a third of the hands raised indicate that the answer to that question, they say, right. Because I've been telling you, keep developing your audience.
Interesting.
And there they are.
Right.
But they're coming for not necessarily what that veteran ticket buyer wants. Because I do think in any field, we often will say, have somebody come and experience something that I like mm-hmm. the way I like it. Mm-hmm. And I think if you tweak it and say, I'd like for people to come experience something that we present at a high level, mm-hmm. but really be mindful of all the different ways that people would like it to be, then you just have to massage the message about what that experience is in real time. So to answer your question, I take a lot of care in thinking about how to explain which things to explain. I don't speak before every piece, mm-hmm. but there are certain moments in a concert. The beginning is really a lovely time to put things into context, let the concert run for a little while, and then if there's a little switch or an opportunity, for example, the concert you attended, to put a visual image in people's head before we put the music in the performance, that really gives folks a chance to recalibrate and think, okay, now this is on me to create that visual image, and then the orchestra can do its thing. So I think that's really important. Mm-hmm. And you just have to be respectful of the fact that people are there because they've decided to be there. People want to have a great time. They want to enjoy what's happening on stage, but they're all coming from this wildly diverse world of music.
Right. And the concert that I went to, it was Carmen to Bohemian Rhapsody,
yeah.
which was a interesting mix.
Yeah.
But the connection was these performances and the others of the night were all having anniversaries.
Correct.
From 50 years to 300 years.
Correct.
So that was kind of the connection.
Exactly. So New West Symphony here in Thousand Oaks, California, and also in Camarillo is celebrating its 30th anniversary in 2025. And I thought it would be fun to pick one of our concerts to do a whole big anniversary something. So you just think about what that might be. So I started looking what other music is celebrating anniversaries. And so the opera Carmen had its premiere in March of 1875. And I thought, wow, 150 years for the most popular opera of all time. That's interesting. So I put that on there because as a symphony orchestra, occasionally we'll dabble into opera, but it would be nice just to have something that has music people will know, but also a genre that not many folks are exposed to these days, opera. So how can I do that in a way that would be attractive? Then I looked back, way back, and the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, this particular music was 300 years old, 1725. Moldau of Smetana, back at the exact same year as Carmen. And what I thought would be an interesting thing for the audience to consider is you have this piece by a Czech composer and another work by a French composer premiered 1 month apart.
Interesting.
But so completely different. And I just thought placing that tidbit in front of the audience and explaining about the river and the flow and all that, I think it really conjured some things. And then I thought, all right, now let's get closer to our time frame. And so I started looking at just pop songs. What has a significant anniversary? And that's where it completely blew my mind, because Bohemian Rhapsody, Mamma Mia, Rhinestone Cowboy were the 3 songs that we did with the audience and our chorus and our soloists and the orchestra. And they were all released in 1975. So just by creating this umbrella of a theme, I think it allowed the audience to just kind of track the time frame and juxtapose the journey, I suppose, juxtapose the musical examples as part of the line through, and kind of accept the notion that we got from 1725 to 1975 in one night.
Right.
In some interesting way. So we had what we call semi-staged opera.
Right.
The orchestra's on stage, kind of a character in the opera, 35 minutes of the greatest hits of Carmen. And then we spilled into the second half with Bach, which I think was quite a big shift for everybody's ears to hear that kind of crystalline, pure music.
Right.
And then what I thought was just so much fun was you have hundreds and hundreds of phones with their lights on, swaying along as people
Like
sing
cigarette lighters used to be back in the day.
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
And it was just cool. And, a lot of, I would say most orchestras define their genres in series. So there'll be a pop series, there'll be a classic series, there'll be a family series. And it really made me wonder, well, what if we blend them more? Because what the notion about 40 years ago was create a pop series, and those people that are coming to hear a pop singer or a jazz singer or a movie with an orchestra, that maybe they'd be curious about the other music and they would come to the classic side of the program. And it never happened. You'd have single-digit percentages of those people.
Right.
I remember when I was growing up in Buffalo, New York in the 80s, my parents took us to the Buffalo Philharmonic, amazing orchestra, the hall. We heard Judy Collins in concert. We heard, I guess, so many different pop artists. But my parents never said, now let's go hear Mozart, which was perfectly reasonable.
Right.
I did eventually, when I became a musician, played trumpet.
They wanted to go to the pop stuff.
They thought that was going to be a great way for us to have this family experience. Hear the orchestra. The orchestra played some symphonic music, but I think it was about variety, and I think that bit of influence really sunk into my DNA. So I've been thinking for a long time. I've been doing this for 30 years.
Wow.
Since 1995. And I've been thinking about this a long time. Sometimes I would do thematic-based programs, but they were still highly emphasizing kind of classical symphonic music, which I think in a lot of communities, that works great. I think the communities, if you want to just divvy them up, there's going to be communities who say, I want those pure series kinds of things. I want all of my classical, or I want all of my pops. I think there are going to be some communities who say, half and half, maybe this. And then there's going to be some communities, which I think ours here in Southern California is a perfect example, of people who say, I had no idea that I was going to love the breadth of music.
Right.
And then actually you're acting it more as a curator than anything else.
What I loved was it was explained. So like Carmen, I was like, oh yeah, I recognize that. But if you told me, Carmen, I've heard of it, but I wouldn't know until I heard it
Yeah.
that I recognized it, right?
Right.
But then you had the words on the screen.
Sure.
So, you appreciate, I think it's Italian, right?
It was French.
French. See,
in
what
this
do I
case,
know?
Yeah. No.
But as English only speaker,
Of course.
You knew what was happening. You
Yep.
could follow along because the words were on the screen. And then
Absolutely.
when you got to the symphonies, the Bach and the East German
Yep.
composer,
Right.
you explained that this was starting as a very small river, kind of like the Mississippi. You
Right,
could stand on either side.
Yep.
But then you followed the towns and the villages, and then it became a grand
Yep.
production
Yep.
towards the end. So it was, if you hadn't explained that, I would have appreciated it, but not enjoyed it as much. So I think that's what made the difference.
Yeah, I'm glad it worked. And opera companies, when you go, they do project those translations. None of what we're doing is unusual directly, but I think what is a huge challenge for classical music in general is that people just don't know what to expect.
Right.
And they look at a program and they might recognize Beethoven. They might recognize Mozart.
Right.
Somehow.
Right.
And those are the people you think, oh, if we could just draw in those people that are in age group, and if now that they don't have kids in the house, they'll come and hear Beethoven. And I actually think that it's more interesting to develop the idea that when people come to hear our performances, that they know it's going to be an experience. I would just leave it at that,
Right.
that they're going to be led through the experience. They're going to understand on a certain level, and then they can take in the music how they want. I just think that's our job now.
Right.
Rather than getting so concerned about the proportions of this composer versus that, or this genre versus this. If you can tell the story through the concert after concert, with all of the mix of music that is in the world, you have a great chance. But if you come back, or if you see it, one of our programs, you may say, I have no idea what any of that means. I really enjoyed this part of the concert. I really appreciated the explanation. I thought the diversity of programming, huge swath of music was interesting. I'll buy in again. If I could get to that point with enough people to fill the hall each time, I'd be golden.
You're good.
And that's my goal.
Yep. And then, of course, the finale was the pop songs that everybody knows, and they've got their phones out like the old cigarette lighters that people used to use. And again, the connection was the anniversaries. So you had Rhinestone Cowboy, which of course was my favorite because I'm a huge Glenn Campbell fan, because True Grit was my favorite movie of all time. And so I totally recognize that. But then you had ABBA at the very, Mamma Mia at the very end.
Yeah.
And much of the audience was singing along.
Absolutely. I just feel also that as it's not has nothing to do with the political time that we're in, but there's something about how we have evolved through COVID, et cetera, where I think as an arts organization, we do have a great opportunity to give people a moment of catharsis and experiencing these things together, and not worrying if you're belting it out and you're a little bit off key because everyone else is having a great time. There just aren't very many moments in our lives anymore where we can just rock out with each other.
Right.
And that's what I really want to provide. But it's just an experiment, because that program that you saw really was such a batting back and forth between eras, and I don't think people minded.
No, it was thoroughly enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, in that half, the second half of the concert, we did go from 1725 to 1875 to 1975, just bam, bam, bam. But people left singing those songs, having participated in the performance, and felt like they had been on a journey.
Yeah.
And that was so satisfying to me.
Awesome. So how does one become a musical conductor? Because there's not too many of you in the country.
No. It's I would say it's kind of like an apprenticeship type thing. There are certain aspects of the job that everybody does, the beating of those kinds of things, but the way you learn about music, the subtleties of it, the way that composers connect with their culture and manifests in music, like that stuff you learn from a master who's imparted that information. And then it's, unfortunately, it's one of those jobs that it is on-the-job training. Because if you imagine, a conductor should make no sound,
Right.
ultimately.
Right.
During the performance, obviously, you want to introduce the pieces, but
Right.
your gestures help bring that group of musicians together in whatever way, whether it's the speed, whether it's the volume, other sensitivities. And you can only experience that physicality when you actually make a gesture and 60 human beings respond to that gesture. It's a funny thing because you take a breath, you give them the beat, and then suddenly they've made an agreement with you that they're going to participate with you. But when you hear that immediate response, that's something you can only then bring a nuance to once you've experienced it for a long time. So it does become a really apprentice style thing. And the orchestra actually is a great part of that because, especially for younger conductors, you are making those requests physically with the players.
Right.
You know, you give a bigger gesture, what is that going to sound like? You give a smaller gesture, a faster gesture. And so that kind of unspoken contract is something you just have to actually experience in real time.
Were you playing an instrument and then said, I think I want to try this? You were playing the trumpet.
Trumpet was my instrument.
And then you saw the conductor and said, I want to try this?
You know, I asked a wonderful man, John Landers, my middle school teacher in West Seneca, New York. I just said to him during a trumpet lesson, I don't understand how it is that you do that gesture and we respond.
Yeah.
And he was so generous about helping me figure that out. And he actually let me conduct a little piece on the concert and helped me understand how that worked. And it was a thrill.
And that was middle school.
It was middle school.
So in high school, you
So
kind of
lucky.
picked up a little bit more.
Yes. Yep. That was a youth orchestra. And then I went to Oberlin College in Ohio as a trumpet major. And most people will train on a path to becoming a conductor in graduate school. But because Oberlin is an undergrad-only school, the opportunities that would normally be done by graduate students still have to be done.
Right.
Recital orchestras, your local church choir, all those other things. And so the opportunities for undergrads was vast. And I was able to get into that system. Then I went to a competition in Helsinki, Finland, got a prize there. And then I was on this journey, as I mentioned before, of standing before professional musicians who were sitting in those seats longer than I was alive. And I was asking them, with this unspoken contract, to come along with me in an interpretation of music. Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. I remember some of those rehearsals so well because it's one thing to listen to the music, study the score, but it's another thing to come into the culture of an orchestra, of an organization that has its system of playing.
Right.
They know how to react to a conductor, and they have their own unspoken agreements, or sometimes they work it out. They have their own agreement about how loud they'll play within the context of the bigger ensemble. Sometimes the conductor will give a beat, and the orchestra just kind of gives is a delay. It's hard to measure exactly, but the way that we do respond is almost, you see the gesture, you register it, and then you play.
Right.
And so there's always this little bit of a delay. And so as a young conductor, you give the beat, ba, ba, ba.
Right.
Even that, the first time you experience it, you're like, what on earth is going on?
Right.
But it's the flesh of the dynamic between, there's a little smush there, right? That has to happen. So that's how I got started.
Interesting. And you went on to win a Grammy connecting opera to Steve Jobs.
So yeah, two great colleagues of mine, Mark Campbell, who's an amazing librettist, and Mason Bates, a wonderful composer, decided to tell the story of Steve Jobs' life through opera.
I never would have connected the two words in the same sentence.
Yeah, it's really, really amazing because Steve Jobs is the person who has enabled billions of people to communicate together in an instant,
Right.
but who struggled so much to motivate people constructively. It was more kind of brr.
Right.
But then he had this amazing wife, Laureen Powell Jobs, who corralled him and did all these relationships. He had a spiritual advisor. So actually, in an operatic sense, in a theatrical sense, he experienced all those things, the love, the longing, and the loss, the successes, the failures, and it really made a perfect opera. So people can hear it on all the streaming platforms, Apple, Spotify. All
And
those.
is that in English?
It's in English, yeah, and it's short. It's just a little over an hour and a half. I'm trying to remember how many scenes, 17, 18 scenes that are very short. And they decided to put them a little bit out of order. And because it's as if Steve is remembering, almost like in the last flash of life. You're quickly remembering
Right.
all of the things that happened in life. And so you just kind of imagine this. And it has been such a great project.
Interesting. Now, did that all take place up in the Bay Area where he was from, or did that concert travel around the?
It was premiered in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Oh, wow.
And then it has gone all over the place. And we're taking it to Europe next year.
Interesting.
But yes, it's been to Seattle. It has been to Atlanta, Kansas City, Salt Lake City. Actually, it has not had a Southern California premiere yet.
Interesting. Now, is it the same? Maybe it's a silly question, but is it the same musicians and the same singers that travel the globe, or is it changing?
Oh, no, that's very interesting. So there are two main productions of it. So that's the costumes, the sets, all the lighting and everything. There are two main productions that are kind of going around. There are a number of people who are more or less fixtures in the cast, but then other companies are weaving in some new singers. There's actually a production happening in Washington, D.C. with a different conductor. So already the production's kind of in different hands.
Interesting.
But it was amazing to be part of the beginning of that. How did Steve Jobs react to this?
Right.
And how do you make that happen in music?
Right.
So it's fascinating. And I think in a lot of ways that because people are able to read that Isaacson biography or see Ashton Kutcher on film representing that, it's so timely. But enough time, I suppose, has passed that he's become a little bit of a, I don't know, enigmatic personality in our collective memories.
Right.
It's kind of interesting to present a viewpoint, and then you can agree or disagree with the viewpoint.
Right. So, New West Symphony, there's a lot going on there. I mean, they've got children's programs, gifted musicians, bringing in different choirs, Pepperdine University and local high school choirs. It's not just, periodic concert events. It's all year long.
For a relatively small organization, we're small but mighty. We like to say. One of the things COVID did teach us was the importance of partnerships, and it's something that we have really, really latched onto. I think it's very easy to say, you group of school kids, you group of community volunteers, you come, we'll give you a group discount to come see us do our thing. But I think it's more potent to say, come and do your thing with us. And so we share the stage with Kineo Chinese Cultural Association. We share our stage with Farhang Foundation. We share our stage with Los Robles Children's Choir, with the Pepperdine University Chamber Choir, State Street Ballet.
So there's a collaboration going on there.
Totally. And it's been really great, not only for audience development, which is obvious, but when you authentically say to somebody, we love what you're doing, we love that you're striving to build your artistic imprint, and we want to bring that together with us, the vibrancy of that is huge. So we try in every one of our concerts to have at least one community performance partner.
And the one that I saw was Pepperdine
Yep.
University, and then Los Robles
Children's
Choir.
Yep.
Which was awesome.
Yeah, they were so cute.
And then you had is it Labby Harmony Project?
Labby.
So that's gifted musicians who they just maybe need a leg up, and you recognize how good they are, and and are going to help them along.
Yeah, our Lab eHarmony project is, I believe, now 14 years old. We serve underserved students in West Ventura, the city of Ventura, in west part of Ventura County. And we've been there. We serve 160 students in after-school programs every day.
Every day.
Yep, every school day. They get not only music instruction, they have time to do homework and ensemble playing, individual lessons, etc. And we have the students that go through from transitional kindergarten through senior year. They get this foundation, and we've had 2 graduating classes go through the whole program. And all the students that have gone on to college and university have been the first to attend a tertiary education in their family.
Really?
So we're very proud.
Interesting.
And not as musicians necessarily.
Oh, really?
Engineers.
Okay.
We're not trying to train musicians necessarily, but we do see it as a vehicle to inspire their creativity and give them confidence to be creative people, whatever they do.
So what's the future of symphonies in general, would you say?
Well, I do think it's very community-based. I think that, personally that variety is key. That's my belief. I think partnerships are key. Symphony orchestras are expensive because it's a lot of people. You know, when you think about a rock band that's on tour, 4 people touring with maybe a roadie and a general manager. I mean,
Right.
7, 8 people maybe. But
Right.
when you put an orchestra on stage, anywhere from 45 to 90 players, to get that sound, it's an expensive proposition. So you really need to have supporters, obviously, that believe in that mission, because there is no orchestra in the world that I'm aware of that earns more than 50% of their revenue through ticket sales.
Oh, really?
It's just so expensive. So we strive for that. We really do strive for that. The future, I think, is good because people know the orchestra sound overall through film music, commercials. But there are a lot of people who've never experienced a symphony performance. And I take that very seriously. I have no musicians in my family. My whole extended family, I'm the black sheep in the family. So every time I put together a concert, I try to imagine any one of my family members there, and I want to imagine what their experience would be like. Would they enjoy the music just as a first thing?
Right.
Would they understand on some level what we were doing? That's my responsibility to help them with that. Would they think to come back? So if those 3 items, if my family were to do that, then I was to then unleash that kind of success on the rest of the community, then we're in good shape.
Then you've done your job.
Then we've done our job.
So at some point, switching gears here a little bit, at some point, rock and roll felt it necessary, or they thought it was a good idea to bring in orchestra music.
Absolutely. Well, I think about Simon and Garfunkel. I think about the Beatles. I think about Freddie Mercury with our Bohemian Rhapsody, doing a little kind of a parody of opera. I think about Chicago with the brass that they have.
They had a big band.
They had a big band.
Chicago did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think and then if you go advance a decade and a half or so, then you have indie rock. And these folks actually had the foundation of the band be a cello with a trombone or a bassoon, because those people trained on those instruments and they felt they could express themselves with those instruments. So I do think people hear a sound on a film score and they think, oh, I have my poetry that I'm setting to music, and wouldn't it be great to have a violin playing with that? And there's been such an emergence of creativity, and people also creating outside of necessarily a studio environment,
Right.
and just making their own tracks and things. And so I do think in the right hands with a great arranger, you can take those 60 musicians and you can weave it into any music, country music, any kind of rock music. You can have R&B and all that stuff. I think a lot of it's just where those artists get their energy from. Some artists are, very percussive and they got the drum set energy. Some people want to hear the padding of those strings. Some people want to hear the stratospheric rise of the violin going up, and they want to hear that brass just hitting those chords. Right. It just depends on their aesthetic, but it's really fun when people hear the concert you heard, for example, with Bohemian Rhapsody, and you hear those songs, the electric guitar solo, but it's in the brass and the strings, and
Right.
but you just hear all that. And you know, when we did Mamma Mia on that concert, to hear that like those were all the instruments that ABBA used, but you just hear it with a different palette.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's amazing that those artists, they composed their songs and they thought, yeah, I need more than an electric bass, guitar, and drums. I need to have a flute
Right.
in there. I need to have that triangle. I need to have that. And I just think it's part of our musical vocabulary.
And I would think with movie making, it's somewhat similar. You know, you decide if you need the big orchestra, or if you're just low budget, you just, you know, you don't have it. But like Wicked just came out, they had a full orchestra. And then, you know, Star Wars, of course, and other movies that had full orchestras versus not.
Well, one of the wonderful things about New West Symphony and the orchestras that are in our vicinity is that many of the players that we use are in those studios. So our players play for John Williams. They play for the Netflix series that are going with live musicians. So, you know, they're very well versed in how that whole thing works. But yeah, I think when you do an example of if you play the idea of playing a scene of Star Wars and you take the music out and then you put the music back in and you hear Leia's theme, or you hear the beginning of the Imperial March, you can have all the dialogue, but if you're missing bum bum bum,
It's not the same.
bum, bum,
Yeah.
you know, it's that kind of thing. But I just think it's incumbent upon orchestras to think about the fact that this is the world's that span of music is in people's musical vocabulary, and how exciting it is to hear 60 people playing it with huge intensity, whether it's soft and touching, whether it's loud and driving. But you can't copy that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I think symphony orchestras have a good future.
And something I hadn't heard before was one of the symphony performances last night. There was, I think, a 5-minute oboe soloist.
Oh, yeah.
It was incredible. And you were just kind of letting her do her own thing because you were, you know, busy with the full symphony, but she was amazing.
I think it's really important to acknowledge the individuals in the orchestra when we can. So yes, in one of the Bach cantatas, there was a beautiful feature for what's called the oboe d'amore. And it was great to just bring her up to the front. The chorus was singing, the strings were playing, but usually the oboe is buried in the middle of the orchestra.
Right.
And on many occasions now, if there's a featured instrument, I'll have them stand up and play their bit, or bring them to the front, because people want to know, ultimately. They want to know what that person's doing. And I think in that case, what was so amazing is that particular solo part, that thing just didn't stop.
Right. It just, it was at least 5 minutes.
Exactly. She stood there playing. This is one of the big exposed parts in a piece that she very rarely gets to play. And I thought, well, I can't have her be buried in the back of the orchestra and have people going, what's going on back there? What's that sound?
Right.
So I think it's really important. I think it's important for the players to get acknowledged and take a bow, because people, as I said before, they've committed their time, they've committed their interest and their curiosity, and we need to be gracious and we need to celebrate that, all the talent we have.
Right. So what events are coming up in the future, and how can folks learn more?
Well, New West Symphony will be back in the fall of 2025. We'll be presenting, I like to do tapas style programs where I take it one composer and then pick really the best music from lots of genres. So big orchestra, one player, lots of different things. So we'll have the best of Beethoven. We're going to be playing E.T., the film score with the film, so people can see the film with the full
you're
orchestra.
watching the movie in the background?
With the orchestra there. We have holiday performances. And then in 2026, we'll be joining the whole country in celebrating the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
Very cool.
Yeah, so it's if people remember 1976 and how important that bicentennial was, imagine 250 years. Big deal.
Big deal.
So we'll have a lot of Americana and a lot to celebrate.
Is there a website, Facebook, Instagram people can check out?
Yeah, sure. We're on all the platforms, New West Symphony. And then, of course, our website is newwestsymphony.org.
Wonderful. Well, Michael Christie, thank you so much for being our guest on this On the Road. We loved having you and learning about New West Symphony and yourself.
Thank you for your interest. And here's to great music.
Absolutely. And of course, we want to thank our sponsor, Opus Escrow. Be sure to tune in next time for On the Road.